Hello, everyone. I hope you all had a chance to recharge on some coffee. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate your attendance and your participation. The energy and the enthusiasm have been phenomenal, both in person and on Zoom. Thank you for all of that, and thank you for sticking with me throughout my little thematic journey, if you will. Um, Wang Ping is the poet whom I have opened with and is also the poet whom I shall close with. Her words are truly inspirational. She's also local and focusing local immigrant and non-citizen voices, as well as forms of expression and art, I think are, to say the least, are at the crux and heart of a lot of the topics and points that we've touched on today. So in that spirit, I shall conclude with Tsunami Chant for the last session. I'm not a singer, but please let me sing of the peacemakers on the streets and internet. Your candles in the darkest moment of night, your bodies on the steps of government buildings, your voices from the roots of grasses and trees, from your pit of conscience, from your pit of conscience, from your pit of conscience. I'm not a prayer, but please give my voice to the children in Baghdad, Basra, Afghanistan, and every other bombed out place on earth. You're crying out in pain and fear. Please give my hands to the mothers, raking through rubble for food, bodies. My sight to the cities and fields in the smoke. My tears to the men and women who are brought home in bags. Thank you, and I'd like to welcome you to the fourth and final session of the Binger Center's annual Immigration Forum, Fall 2022 Asylum Conference.
We had a couple leftover questions from the last session, and I cleared this with this panel that they want to answer them. So I'm going to kick off with that before they begin their planned program. So there were two questions. I will read both of them, and you all can decide who wants to answer. One was, what can I do about failure to approve work permit? What can I tell my client? And then the second question I know has come up from a lot of people about temporary protected status. It said you mentioned in passing temporary protected status, TPS, when you have Friday coffee sessions. Obviously, if the country applies to the client and they fall in the eligibility window, I'm assuming the advice would be to apply for it as an alternative or backup. But can you speak a little about the interplay of TPS and asylum? I know historically there have been periods of time where this created a pathway to status outside of asylum and other times not, but the court might still administratively close or terminate proceedings. Can you speak a little bit about the current interplay?
So I think I'll handle the first question, which is what to do about what I think is probably considered, in my estimation, probably a crisis right now at USCIS, which is the aspect of work authorization. Like what to do about these delays on work authorization and how to have that communication with client. And I would just say, just from my personal experience, I have a client that I'm working with right now. I've literally had 3 applications of work for work authorization. None of those 3 have come through yet, and it's been like 3.5 years. So what can I say except the fact that you need to be upfront with a client, need to make sure that once you know or have an idea or be communicating in a very clear manner about what is happening and these delays, and at the same time try to explain why and where this is as much as you can as possible. I did have one situation where I had a client who had filed an EAD and was waiting, and I had realized at some point during the waiting process that he was not going to be eligible for the automatic extension that had been granted for a large number of other people who had delays in their EAD because his EAD was based on an order of supervision. And of course, the only thing I could tell him is that we need to go at least try to get some congressional help to see if we can dislodge it. All the congressionals here in Minnesota, this has become old hat for them, unfortunately. This is one of their common things that they do with the community. And until USCIS has fixed what they do, that is one thing that people can do. I know in other contexts with USCIS delays, there have been more and more mandamus actions. I'm not aware of any mandamus on EADs, but I think unfortunately, this is just a situation that I don't see changing anytime soon. And my only answer to the question of how to communicate this with the client is to be very, very open and try to find other solutions for the client. It is something, if you guys are aware, California, UCLA has come out with basically a letter urging the University of California to start hiring people who are not authorized to work under a theory that the IRCA, which is the one that requires EADs for work, does not apply to states because of sovereign immunity issues. That's one creative solution. We don't have that in Minnesota just yet, but it is something that might come up. Other ideas is trying to be very honest and talk to the client. I think if you were here in the morning, there was one portion where a student was trying to have that conversation with someone about who was worried about not being able to work. And the student was like, well, everybody works. That's probably not the advice you should be giving. In fact, it is not the advice you should be giving. But at the same time, there are things that you can tell the client about ways in which they can lawfully make money, and that might be something that would be required. I have personally tried to find and worked with organizations that give money in terms of mutual aid. Look for other sources of mutual aid for clients who are in this type of situation. But otherwise, it really is a matter of just understanding that you might have to keep pounding your head in the sand for the foreseeable future until things really change and until maybe some of the law around it changes. So sorry I don't have a magic solution, which is probably true for much of immigration law.
All right, well, I'll try to address the temporary protected status question, and then Linus can jump in if there are additional things. So temporary protected, well, first of all, I'll just say in general, it's always good advice to pursue any benefits that your client is eligible for, because you never know what might change in Congress, or as we saw under the previous administration in terms of interpretation of asylum law. So TPS is not a conflict with an asylum case, so it's a very good one to pursue if your client is eligible. Temporary protected status is designed to be exactly what the name is. It's designed to be, so it's Congress will designate a country and a specific entry period for a temporary, so that people from that country who entered by a certain date can stay temporarily in the United States legally. Work authorization is part of that as well. And but it's designed to sunset, and so a date will be set by which it could sunset. So there's a couple ways it's different from asylum. Number one, it is there's no requirement of a showing of individualized persecution the way there is with asylum. Our asylum system is based on, is a way that the United States fulfills our obligations under the Refugee Convention. There's nothing similar with the temporary protected status. This is just a benefit that our government is choosing to give. That having been said, there's a lot of the same kinds of push factors that are included in temporary protected status designation. So conflict, for example, that's what we've seen a lot, but also environmental disasters, so earthquakes, floods, things like that. There have been several countries that have been designated for that. Now, where it gets confusing is that there have been many situations in which the conflict has been prolonged. The Liberian example is a really good one, with two sustained conflicts and people that ended up being on temporary protected status for 20 years. And so then there was a movement so a separate congressional act that then gave individuals that had been part of that, or that had been designated under the temporary protected status, they were able to then adjust. So that's not the purpose of TPS, but it does sometimes happen, so it's another reason. The last thing I'll say on TPS is that there have been multiple examples of, in a prolonged, especially conflict situation, where there has been a second designation period. So that's something you want to keep an eye out for as well, and make sure that you get your client registered. And I guess the last thing I will say about it is that it is a much more straightforward process. It doesn't require an individualized interview unless that's changed. So it's just submitting a form, and you basically just have to prove that your client was in the country by the designation date, and that they're a citizen of that country. So it's a good.
Yeah, a couple things I just want to add about that. One is there is a push right now for immigration groups to recognize Central America, many Central American situations, to either redesignate for certain countries or to designate for the first time. And just to give an idea, right, some of the people with TPS, we're talking about people who were here for Hurricane Mitch, which was almost 15, 20 years ago. The key part about TPS, though, is that we might, for instance, there is TPS right now for Liberia, there was TPS for Honduras, but you had to be here at the time that they had designated. The whole point is not to allow people to claim TPS if they were not here already when the country decided to designate TPS. This is why one of the aspects of a lot of people who are who justifiably look at Congress as unable to actually do anything, this is something that the president can do, especially in reaction to the loss of DACA, is to start designating TPS for a lot of people and start doing it soon. So if that's one thing that you are interested in advocating for, in advocacy, that's one thing that is possible. The second thing about TPS actually two more things. One is crimes disqualify you for TPS, right? While some crimes disqualify you for asylum, more crimes disqualify you for TPS than they do for asylum, right? So that is one big limitation on TPS. People with TPS who commit crimes, they still can face removal and loss of both TPS and the ability to do that. And then finally, I just want to say they've been going back and forth in the courts, but there's been a recent decision that essentially allows someone with TPS who leaves on what's called advanced parole and come back to be recognized as coming back under what's called admission, which can then let them adjust and be able to get a green card in certain situations. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you have or dealing with people who have TPS. It is, as mentioned, it's a relatively straightforward process, and it is a very powerful tool. It is, in my opinion, very much underused, and it's something that the power of the president is clearly established by Congress to extend. So that's just something to consider.
And then maybe just as a segue into what our panel is actually going to be talking about, I'll just share some experience from the Advocates for Human Rights. We were involved in advocacy about extending the designation for Liberians. And so we published two reports. The first one was called Liberia is Not Ready. And so it involved doing documentation of the country conditions in Liberia in order to show that the infrastructure wasn't there to allow people to actually go back to Liberia. The government couldn't support it. So I'll let Mahmoud introduce us.
So we have a wonderful panel. And I appreciate that the questions provided a perfect segue into this last section of our conference. Linus Chan, our one and only of the BCNA, is an associate professor of clinical law and the director of our very own detainee rights clinic. He is an immigration attorney that focuses on removal defense for those detained by immigration and customs enforcement, ICE. He also teaches in the area of intersection of criminal and immigration law. Veronica Cadavid Gonzalez is a Colombian human rights attorney and advocate with a Bachelor of Law from the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana and a Master in Human Rights from the University of Minnesota. Gonzalez's work concentrates on international law, civic space, and legal empowerment, as well as human rights-based approaches to rurality, economic inequality, poverty, and gender. Veronica is a staff attorney with the Advocates for Human Rights as well, and that's what brings her here today. Jennifer Presthold directs organizational operations at the Advocates for Human Rights and supervises the development and administration of the Advocates International Justice Program. As the Advocates for Human Rights Deputy Director, Jennifer assists in fundraising for and directing organizational operations. As the director of the organization's International Justice Program, she supervises the program's development and programming. Our panel will touch on perspectives. We'll touch on perspectives on relationships between attorneys and clients, client organizational structure and institutions, big picture organizing when it comes to local as well as international organizing with clients as actors and agents, as well as mitigating and balancing and navigating the risks and the weight of burnout, moral injury, and the exhaustion that comes with the lengthy periods of immigration law and asylum protocols, procedures, and proceedings. With that, I'll let our wonderful panelists take it away.
So thank you very much for all of you for joining us. I know this has been a long and a wonderful chance for us to meet and talk, and we're now at the end of a long day. So I really appreciate for those of you who are here. So I have been asked primarily to talk about losing. And that's because I lose. And I lose a lot. In fact, I lost a case not like a week and a half ago. And one of the things about that is that came to me not too long ago after I lost about a year and a half ago a case that I cared very much about. And I had lost, and I was sitting there and trying to process this loss, was that we don't talk about losing. We'd never, and as a law student and as a law teacher, I never had really talked to my students about losing. And yet, it is an absolute integral part of my practice. I would say that one of the defining moments I had as a young law student and / lawyer was about when I had my own clinical teacher had explained to me, he had this situation in which we had won a case on appeal, and the case got remanded, and it was a very infamous case, and all these lawyers came out of the woodwork wanting to take the case on remand as a trial attorney. They said, we want to take this case, and my teacher at the time, who was deciding who would take the case up for the retrial, and all these lawyers were telling him about their win-loss records and saying, I never lose a case, or I'm 20-2, or 18-3. And my professor, his name is Larry Marshall, he now teaches at Stanford, looked at us and said, I can tell right away, if you never lose a case, then you're not a very good lawyer. Right? And that stuck with me. It stuck with me in a lot of ways. It stuck with me in how I choose cases. But what I did not appreciate at that time, of course, is what it costs when you decide that it's okay to take cases where you lose. And I did not appreciate what it meant, and I'm trying now, more recently, to try to develop ways in which to be protective about what that means while still taking that adage seriously, in that it is, in fact, not only an okay thing to take cases where we won't win, but in fact is actually an imperative. All right, so just really quickly, I want to see, like, how many of us have lost cases, right? Good. I came out and said, I lose cases. It's good to see other people be bidding and lose cases. How many of us, when we lose cases, we feel crappy, right? How many of us have lost sleep? How many of us have keep playing that over and over our heads? How many of us, after we lose a case, start doubting ourselves, right? When I lose a case, one of the first things that I start thinking about is maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe what is happening is I'm a bad lawyer, I've done something, I failed, etc. And I want to be clear here, and this is important. I am generally a competitive person. I went to law school, for gosh sakes, right? So I don't like losing. And one thing that's really fun about being a father to a 6-year-old is when you see this reflected in a 6-year-old, right? My daughter will change the rules in the middle of a game, will start having a tantrum because she doesn't like to lose. And I realize, and I see that, and I realize, that's a little bit from me. So one of the things that it got me thinking, though, about that is how easy it is when we as lawyers take on a case and think about these as from our perspective. What does our win or loss mean about us? Does it reflect upon me as a lawyer, as a professional, as a person? Because a lot of my identity, right, is in my professional identity. That's really rough. And I want to go back to what this whole theme of this conference, what we heard either last night or this morning, which is how important it is to recognize this isn't about us, right? If you go into this case working from the perspective that this is what I am going to do, and this is easy to do, and I'm not being critical. A lot of us go into the work because we want to help. We want to change things. We want to offset the suffering of others, right? And when we do that, we come in with a perspective that is, I am going to help do that. But it is very easy to forget that it is actually another person with agency, with their own life, with their own stakes, who are there. And if you treat a case more about from where you are, as more as a referendum about you as an attorney, then it's also going to hit much differently however that outcome comes out. So I wanted to be really clear, and this is important because I think a lot of times when we talk about working with clients in collaboration or how important it is to work with the community, we think about it in the sense of like, it's for their good, right? It's the right way to do it because we want to empower other people. But it is also for us. Because if we don't recognize what our actual role in this system, then we're not actually understanding what we are responsible for. And that's another thing that I think I want to make sure to touch upon. It is very easy right? As lawyers, especially when we know the system, we know the institutional actors, we know all of that, right? To think about this as, and I want to be clear, clients often look to us as the gatekeepers, right? I've had so many conversations where clients believe that having a lawyer, right? If I could just get a lawyer, then I win. And of course, I'm not saying having a lawyer on a case is not important. It is of course important, but it is also equally important to make the person, your client, understand that as a lawyer, you are not going to quote unquote be the gatekeeper. You're not the person that is making the decision. You're not the person that is empowered to actually make your case go. And this is the other aspect, right? We talk about power a lot. A lot of times when there is that attitude, then that also means the burden is on us to do quote unquote all the work. We got to make all the decisions. We got to figure out exactly what the strategy is. We have to figure out who we're going to talk to. We're going to have to figure out what our theory of the case is, all of that. But it's really, really important to try to make it clear that the client needs to be part of this, that they need to help make those decisions. They need to be involved in every single aspect of their case, not just for their sake, but for ours, right? There's a couple things I want to I don't have too much time, and I want to talk about it in the context of burnout. We hear this concept about burnout. I just want to really quickly how defining professional burnout. Burnout is one, exhaustion, right? And exhaustion can be both physical and mental and emotional exhaustion. Second is cynicism. And third is the feeling of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. And I want to touch upon this. You can be in partnership with a client, you can do an amazing job, and you can still lose, right? And it is not uncommon for that still to make you feel then a sense of cynicism and a sense of lack of accomplishment. There's a couple things I want to kind of leave us with when it comes to that. One is that we need to understand a little bit, right, that the accomplishment is not necessarily or only the result of the case. And one of the things that I want lawyers, especially young lawyers, to start thinking about, right, if you are working as a lawyer in an area in which winning or losing is not necessarily a reflection on you as a lawyer, then how are you accountable? What do you think would mean to be a good lawyer in that circumstance? If you can't judge yourself as a lawyer because you win all your cases, then how are you judging yourself as a lawyer? How would you expect your clients to judge you as a lawyer? Because there are many things that we can set up as goals, as ideas that we want to do well in our representation that matter, that is not dependent on racist, outdated laws, on judges who are completely overwhelmed and many who do not care, and on DHS attorneys who can barely pay attention to what's happening in front of them. There is many things that we can do. Some of them are process related. Some of them are soft related in terms of relationships. Some of them can be on how you do it. But those are the things that I think it's important to think about, because if you can't judge what you do based on whether you win or lose, then that doesn't mean you're not accountable. You still are. You just got to figure out what that might mean and how that goes. So really quickly, remember, this work is supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to be easy. it's like climbing on the back of Everest. There will be moments and times where it will be hard. Try to keep that a little bit in perspective. Recognize that your clients, even if you lose, have a tremendous amount of resilience, no matter in almost the most awful situations, can have resilience and power and agency. Someone recently reminded me to go back and read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl as a nice way to remind us of what kind of aspects of hopelessness, in even the most hopeless of circumstances, the people's ability to have certain amount of power. And then I'm going to end on this aspect at the end. I also don't want to sugarcoat the idea that much of the work that we do is within a system that is just inherently unfair and unjust. And this is separate than burnout. And it's the idea of what some people have termed moral harm. And the reason why I think I want to make sure it's clear here is that this work will be inevitable, that we are going to confront aspects of moral injury and moral harm to ourselves. Moral harm has been described in some ways in which you feel a betrayal by the community or institutions, right? So often when we can talk about our idea of what the United States should be, our idea of how the Refugee Convention should work, our idea of the community as we watch someone try to become president again, what that means for us, right? We could feel that sense of betrayal. It could be betrayal by self. This is often when you feel like you're part of a system that is unjust, whether it's because you are forced to act in a manner that's contrary to your values, or you're forced to act, or you're unable to act in a manner that's consistent with your values. And or you are just forced to witness the imposition of harm and violence to people and not have the power. And I wanted to end this with a quote, and it's not a very hopeful quote, but it's one that I think we're going to segue to more hopeful stuff. And it's a quote by Primo Levi, who was an Auschwitz survivor. And it's a quote, it says, "It was the same shame which we knew so well, which submerged us after the selections, and every time we had to witness or undergo an outrage, the shame that the Germans never know. The shame which the just man experiences when confronted by a crime committed by another, and he feels remorse because of its existence, because of its having been irrevocably introduced into the world of existing things, and because his will has proved non-existent or feeble and was incapable of putting up a good defense." What I want to emphasize this is, you, as just being a witness to this, can create feelings of shame and remorse. You don't have to have done something wrong. You can still feel that collective shame. And it is something that I think we don't talk about, and it is not, in my opinion, the same as professional burnout, but it is something that is unfortunately at times part of the work we do. So with that, I think I was going to segue to something more about where we can find resilience and hope in working with the clients that we do.
All right.
So thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Jennifer Prestolt with the Advocates for Human Rights. I'm not sure this came across in the intro, but I actually started my career in the asylum field and worked with the Advocates for Human Rights in our asylum program and directed it for a number of years, and then made the switch into our international programming. I'm coming up on 20 years now that I think about it. But I think the thing I want to emphasize is that the Advocates is really unique in that we have this strong and very large legal services program. And then we have the rest of the organization, which is working on long-term systems change in other countries. And so addressing the human rights violations that cause people to come to the U.S. and apply for asylum in the first place. And that's really unique in terms of international human rights organizations. There are lots of organizations that are doing great work with asylum clients, and there are lots of great organizations that are doing great human rights work, but it's very rare that they're housed together. And that gives us the opportunity to think about how our asylum clients are also survivors of human rights abuses and in many cases activists themselves. So they have direct information about the human rights abuses that, and sometimes, you know, kind of like the canary in the coal mine, they're sharing that information before it's even being reported in the media. So, so we made a commitment a few years ago to really try to grow that, that part of our work. And so what we're going to do first is just show a very short video. We actually gave volunteer awards this year at our Human Rights Awards dinner to 5 of our clients who had been working with us on documenting human rights and reporting to the UN and the African regional system. And then we'll talk a little bit more about our advocacy model and what we've learned from working with clients. And Veronica's going to talk about the methodologies and give a few recent examples of success. But first, we'll just show you this quick video. The Advocates creates opportunities for survivors of human rights abuses to help with global advocacy efforts to hold governments accountable. In the past 3 years, more than 71 current and former clients have shared their experiences to help the advocates more effectively fight for human rights. Their stories are particularly important when human rights defenders in their countries of origin cannot speak out without fear of reprisals. Some of these courageous client activists have volunteered their time to participate in direct advocacy with the UN human rights mechanisms.
The Advocates for Human Rights, along partner organization United Oromo Voices, would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for his report on minority issues.
With our International Justice Program team, they have conducted fact-finding and research. They've helped draft written reports, participated in briefings with UN human rights experts, and spoken at several of the Advocates events.
When I moved to the United States and found out the Advocates for Human Rights during my asylum applications, I found that Advocates was doing work related to almost what I was doing back home.
It was a good opportunity to still be here and still be involved somewhat in the fight for the rights of, you know, people like me who are wherever they are in the world, and lending my, you know, sort of knowledge and lived experience to whatever project that is being worked on. So for me, it's been a very fulfilling process and journey. And I know that I would not have been able to go through this entire process without volunteering itself.
These client activists have the courage to speak truth to power, improving human rights conditions by sharing their lived experiences and their recommendations for change with the international community. Thank you to all of the client activists who are working with us to protect human rights worldwide. Okay, so that's just a little intro, and did you say that? Thank you. So as I said, we're gonna go through these agenda points quickly, and then open it up for discussion. So for those of you who are not familiar with the non-legal services side of the Advocates work, this is just a photo actually from some human rights monitoring that we were doing of the transitional justice process in Sierra Leone. So we were interviewing survivors of the conflict there. These specifically were amputees during the conflict there. But our mission is to implement international human rights standards in order to promote civil society and reinforce the rule of law. And the reason that we are involved in international advocacy is not just to, you know, go to Geneva, which is a very nice town, but and the chocolate's good and there's fondue. But that's not why we're doing it. We're using international advocacy to further our mission to implement these human rights standards. And we engage with the United Nations system and with the African regional system, and hopefully more with the Inter-American system.
But we do that in order to amplify the voices of our human rights defender partners, as well as our clients. And that's important because our clients are coming from many countries where they don't have a voice, where they're not listened to, and where you have to go outside of that national system in order to have any kind of leverage, because a lot of those governments will listen to donor countries and other countries in the international community. So we find that it's really effective to have this sort of, like we sometimes talk about it, like a pressure cooker, that you've got the international system in the United Nations putting pressure from above, and then our human rights defender partners at the grassroots level putting pressure from below. And that can be a really effective way to make change. So just really briefly, the Advocates is working on a lot of different human rights issues. We have core programmatic issues, migrant rights and human trafficking, obviously through based on our work with the Refugee and Immigrant Program. We also have a very strong women's rights program. We do a lot of death penalty abolition and work on death penalty and conditions of detention with partners through the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. LGBTIQ plus rights is something that we we do a lot of work on. In the U.S., we've been focusing a lot more on racial justice and police accountability. And then there are a lot of issues and expertise that come up just based on our collaborative relationships with our human rights defender partners. So we've worked on indigenous rights, we worked on minority rights, for example, religious minority rights in India. Do a lot of work on protections for human rights defenders, freedom of expression and assembly and political participation, and then issues that are identified through the cases, the intake that we're seeing at the Advocate. So that's kind of how we decide what issues we're going to take on. So a few things about the arenas for our advocacy on the international level. There are multiple, and so we sort of, as a staff in our international justice program, think through what's going to be the most effective, what opportunities are coming up. So one is kind of I guess more in the agency side. I'm trying to think of how to draw analogies to the U.S. system, but the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is kind of the functional agency that works on human rights in the UN system. They have local offices in many countries, and so we've worked with a number of those OHCHR offices. Also, there are what are called UN Special Procedures mechanisms. These are independent experts that are appointed by the Human Rights Council to either look at specific countries or to look at specific issues, whether it's violence against women, or there are now more than 50 of these special procedures opportunities, and there is an individual complaint process that you can submit through. It's an online platform, and so you can submit information about human rights abuses in, and there's a lot of cross-mandate kind of things too, and so it allows you to tick the boxes, and then they can write a letter to the government, and so that's one way that we participate. The Human Rights Council is the political body at the UN, so it's made up of member states of the United Nations. So you hear a lot in the U.S. about that when the U.S. left the Human Rights Council. There's 50 some seats on the Human Rights Council, but in terms of advocacy, it doesn't really matter because every member of the United Nations has a seat in that room. And so when we do our advocacy, we're reaching out to those representatives of those governments as well. And in the video, you saw one of our former clients who was giving an oral statement at the Human Rights Council. So there are those kind of opportunities too to publicly speak at the Human Rights Council about different issues. There are also treaty monitoring bodies, so every human rights treaty, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention Against Torture, those they have independent experts that have been appointed to monitor the implementation of that treaty. And what that means, in part, is that governments have to come and report on how they're implementing the treaty. So those are good opportunities for us to both submit written reports and then also to brief the committee members on what's going on in what's actually going on in the countries, because as you can imagine, the governments that are presenting information about their countries are very positive about what's happening in their country, their human rights situation in their country. And then, so that's the international level, and then at the regional level, a number of regions, primarily the African system, the European, and the Inter-American system have kind of similar processes and mechanisms that that can be very effective for international advocacy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Veronica.
Thank you, Jennifer. So, as Jennifer was describing, we are doing work with our clients who are part of a legal representation program, but in these arenas of advocacy. And we use for that legal empowerment as an approach, but also as an outcome that we have to get more and more empowerment from us to shape these institutions and these arenas. The advocate's principle of work, as you might heard, is everyone has a role in human rights, and we are rooting to propitiate opportunities for these asylum seekers of asylees to continue exercising, because many of them were human rights defenders, or to start to play their role in human rights domestically and internationally. We like to think this as foster opportunities, and we are trying to implement direct engagement with institutions and legal systems, and shape these mechanisms. Human rights and international law, it's very dynamic and it's changing a lot by interacting with it and interacting with the states and creating new standards and protecting and new rights. So it's important that those daily interactions in that experience with those standards and rules are part of that shaping and that we want to do. Also, context information, it's very important when we're trying to establish persecution of the human rights violations that are happening in states, and who else can give us that information, that clients. And we are not talking only about a one side benefit, it's a symbiotic relationship, because we are fostering opportunities because they care about their countries of origin, but we also are benefiting so much about that collaborative work and advocacy, because the life experience is extremely beneficial and is irreplaceable. No one has better answers, and nobody has more urgency than those who had to flee those countries. And we are also helping to localize in human rights, like here in the domestic arena in the United States, that perceptions about how human rights are guaranteed and how that happen, how violations or abuses of human rights happen in other countries, can make parallels, there are parallel situations in other countries. And that also brings us more information to localize those standards, how they are working in other places, to the domestic work that we do here, because we also do advocacy work internally. And that fosters also social mobilization, which is very important, because this is how we change frameworks, contest those frameworks and modifying come from own experience, and who better that those who are shaped by other experience in other countries, but then are facing how the United States is trying to implement human rights by implementing the UN Convention on Refugees.
Oh, sorry. Am I supposed to be doing it for you?
There is something very important on our advocacy, and that's that our clients are more than their story of persecution. So it's very important that we include in the collaboration that we do with them other elements of their identity. Many of them were human rights defenders, but before to cross frontiers, they were part of communities, organizations. They know the institutions. They were parents and mothers. And now that are moving frontiers and they are here, those that people is developing new communities and join work in organization, private and public, and that experience is so valuable and important. Also, they help us to build trust together, to know that we can create a work that is beyond the legal assistance, but that we value their work and their knowledge. And in that, normally what we do when we talk about clients, it's like we don't, why we are open to talk about their story. We normally also ask about the issues that we are seeing in the countries and ask them, like, what do you think about that? What do you think other issues we can maybe report about? What do you think are the most urgent and priority issues that we need to take? And that I'm going to develop that further and later, but it's very important, like voicing that knowledge about their identity and how that context that they have. And there is not only one way that we provide collaboration possibilities, and we try to make decisions in a way that we don't impose a way to collaborate. This is, and there is normally just not one. So what we're trying to do is to present different opportunities to do advocacy together, and taking into account the agency that all these clients have, that they were strong to flee those abuses and seek for protection, respect that agency, and present opportunities. In that is also important that while we present different opportunities, we try to also ask what they think about the what and how. Like, these are the opportunities we are seeing, but what else do you think we can do? So it's not only about asking about the substantive part, it's also about asking them about the process. And that includes the multiple ways that you can do advocacy together. And that also can be useful a lot, for example, when you're thinking of country conditions for asylum applications. It's also important that bringing a space for those ideas. And for that, we try to have planning and give time. So it's important to have enough time to build relationships, to build trust, and also to give them time to think about how to process the advocacy model that we have, and also to keep back and forward about the discussion and chatting. And without saying in abstract, I would like to show you some engagement opportunities that we do actually right now in the organization. As I told you, we consult in priority issues. Normally, a lot of the issues that our clients see from their countries of origin, it can give us an idea of what are the most pressing issues that we need to start to do advocacy in international areas. It also shows what is the most effective way to implement human rights standards and actually place those international standards in a geographic area, because we might have an idea about how institutions work or what are the best institutions for implementing human rights in a particular context, but they know better because they know the local context. And again, life experience, it's very important. Second, we ask for permission to use their story. We have then a synchrony with our legal services, because we have already the information because the asylum process, and we ask for permission to use the story. It's very important to highlight that we use that story in a confidential way. So there is a staff member who read it, normally protecting like the wall that needs to be about confidentiality, and we take away any kind of information that can identify the person of the context. So it's a very way, like it's a safety, like safety is our priority for use information of those stories. In that particular way to engage, we also clarify about what is the process that we're going to use the story. And every time that we are doing advocacy on that particular country or that particular issue, we ask again for permission. This is a way to engage and to present that information in international arenas when, like sometimes people don't have much time to read a report, a complete report, or sit with us for 3 hours to think about the issues. So it's a way to contribute to present those issues in international arenas without having to get so much time to it. And that can change. One day we can have a lot of time to review it, but sometimes I just want to have the context of my story in that report, and that's valuable in either way. We also have information provision about human rights violations and country conditions. There's a lot of information that is beyond our reach because lingual barriers, because sometimes people who are locally know better about what are the legitimate source of information. So we partner with them to get to know what are the information that we can get. Or sometimes they connect us with other partners, as you can see in the last part. They also validate the information. So sometimes what we do is we sit with them, we start to talk about the issues that we want to present, and then it's a continue checking and like a collective process. We sit, we start to write, we sit again about the issues that we want to think about. They review the information with us, and then after they review the information, we come back again and make the feedback. It's an accountable process. When they have the opportunity to give us feedback and have the control about the information they have. And at the end, when we present the report, we again get back to them so they have the final result. The last one is the local actors. That's very important because, we have found that it's very useful because it brings bridges for them and for us. It brings bridges to legitimize our work in local places too, and present those local actors that are very interested in do partnership with us, which is very important. But also brings the opportunity for these people to keep feeling as a local actor in human rights. They still talking with their partners saying, I still doing work in human rights, now I'm doing it here in diaspora, and I'm collaborating with this organization, and I want to introduce it. So that also makes it, again, a symbiotic relationship when we both beneficiate of that process. I want to give you a testimony about two wonderful examples that we have had these last 6 months. The first one is a direct statement that one of our client activists made to the Human Rights Committee in Geneva. We had the opportunity, because it's an hybrid space, for him to be in the Human Rights Committee and talk to the members of the Human Rights Committee about the revision, about the human rights conditions in Ethiopia. We have done a lot of work with this client. When he sits with us, he tells us about the laws. Sometimes we have, found some issue that we think is very pressing, but he said, in practice, the courts don't use that article, so it doesn't matter. But this case was very important for us because he's in diaspora and he felt he was safe enough to talk about LGBTQ plus issues. And we were the only organization talking about that because he was outside. He felt safe to do it. But the people who are still in Ethiopia, the organizations, most of them don't talk about that issue because the restrictions on and the legal prohibitions about that. So he felt empowered to do it. He wanted to do it, and we went to the meeting together, and he addressed the issue to the different members of the committee. And it was very important for many members of the committee, and they asked us questions about. That meeting was a closed meeting just with the experts. After that, the committee goes and have an interactive dialogue, a public dialogue with the governments. When the Human Rights Committee went to the dialogue with the Ethiopian state, they actually asked the Ethiopian state about the LGBTQ plus people and the conditions that and the abuses that they are suffering in Ethiopia, and that we can say like it's not very like you like it doesn't happen that much regarding that country because again like organizations sometimes are focused in other issues that they can present more safety in a safety way into this arena. So it was very um, it was very good for us to see that space happening and this client actually addressing and to the committee the issue with his own voice and its own analysis about it. But also, it was very important to see that other priority issues, a lot of human rights defenders are in exile because the persecution of that Ethiopia does to LGBTQ plus the LGBTQ plus community. So it was um, very satisfactory see that example. The other one is we have a lot of countries right now in Latin America. We work with a lot of countries in Latin America, and this last period we present a lot of testimonies of like clients about again discrimination that transgender women endure in several countries in Central America, especially El Salvador and Honduras. And we did that analysis, and in the result of the concluding observations, that is the final report of the committee, in this case, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination of Women and the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which are three different committees, three treaty bodies getting information about their clients. In their recommendations, we could see that they actually read the stories and that they were using that analysis to give recommendations to the country about implementing measures um, to endure, like to fulfill freedom and equality for transgender women and women in general. And that was very satisfactory to call our client and say, your testimony was the key, was key for this recommendation. So there is very different ways that you can do engagement with clients, and it is no one singular way to do it. And sometimes it depends what is feasible in the moment, or sometimes it's progressive. One time a client, we call and say, like, we want to do this, make this report, we want to use your story, it's going to be confidential. Then we share the report, and after that we start to work together, and they say, okay, I read the report, now I think about this, so this is what we need to do next. So it's progressive, and it's a way to do collaboration and still having this trust, I build trust, and do better every day, and finding feedback from them about what are the primary issues that we need to do human rights advocacy. And it's also very it teaches a lot of for us as lawyers. And can we? With that, I just want to finish like giving some. What is this? Some example, like some good practices that we have found regarding our work. The first one is that we need to do participatory involvement in all aspects. We try to include client feedback in all the stages of our international advocacy. It's not just one stage. It's like ask them to participate in whatever capacity that they have at the moment, because they're busy people in all the aspects that we do, and give them the possibility, and they can choose whatever fits them better. We listen what they have to say. We try to, we don't push to make them share. I have worked with clients that don't want to work with things related to their own persecution story, but they are very open to review and talk about other issues, and that's totally fine. And we just accept whatever they want to give us, in whatever capacity that they want to work with us. And we actually try to create spaces to make the that allow them to express their opinions, and try to incorporate as much feedback from them as we can. We try to do an official process. We have to make them think, like explain them what we are doing, why we are doing it, and so they can claim that process. They can feel part, like, okay, I'm participating in the report for the Human Rights Committee for the 4-year revision of my country. So it is something that is happening. It's a process that we're doing, and that's very important for us to explain them that this is a process that is happening as part of the UN structure, and it actually has implications and effects in the changes that countries do, because, in the ideal war, countries actually heard the recommendations about human rights, and we have seen a lot of good changes in that. And one last thing is that it's very important to have informed consent, and that is different than paternalism. So when we do advocacy with our clients, we present what is the process about and what are the risks associated with it. And we believe in the agency that they have to choose what is the way that they can engage. So we have had scenarios when we talk to clients, say, okay, you might talk in this space, and there are gonna be other people from the country. Do you feel safe there? And there's people who say, no, I don't feel safe, and we respect that. And I deliver the statement. But in other places, in other spaces, I have clients that we have talked and say, okay, we want to do advocacy in this arena. These are the actors that are gonna be there. These are the risks. Like, people is gonna see your face. People are gonna know that you are right now working with us. Do you feel safe with that? And with an informed consent, they say yes. And I respect that decision, and we go move forward. We do explain the risk, and we respect the agency of that, and we try to draw a line very important about what is informed consent and what is respecting their agency, and work with that. That's a little about our work. This is a continuing work that we're still doing. We want to get better every day, and we talk with clients constantly to ask them about what other ideas we can bring about this collaborative work. So that's a little about our advocacy, and now we are open to questions.
I'll just add that if you have a client from the advocates, there are different points in the intake and closing process that we talk to the clients about these opportunities. So that is being addressed. And we've done a little bit of follow-up with some of the clients that have participated, and it's helped us to, revise and make sure that we're respecting the security. And sometimes, involves talking with their attorneys as well about, just given the level of public, a lot of things are not public don't need to be public at all. So there's some give and take there. But the feedback we've gotten from clients has been just really, really remarkable, that they feel empowered. I mean, think about it. If you've been forced if you've been tortured and forced to leave your country, and left your family behind, and come to the U.S. and then have the opportunity to talk to some of the international experts that are talking directly to the government about it. And so we've heard from some clients, hearing their words come, out of the mouth of somebody with that level of authority in the government, having to sit there and answer the questions. That's just hugely empowering. So we'll stop there and turn it over for questions.
We'd like to invite the audience for discussion. Do we have any questions on the Zoomcast, or would we like to start in the room?
I think I'll just jump in with a little bit about my sort of personal story and view on this while we're waiting for questions. So as I said, I started out as an asylum attorney and did that for a number of years. And when I moved into a different part of the advocates, I was doing using a lot of the same skills of interviewing, but in the context of interviewing someone who had fled the conflict in Liberia and was stuck in Budenburg refugee camp in Ghana, but interviewing them for the Liberian Truth and Reconciliation, so taking a statement from them, it caused me to reflect a lot on how I had handled the interviews before, and it made me really realize that when you're representing someone as an asylum seeker, it's essentially an extractive interviewing process that you're trying to, in a positive way, but you're trying to get information from them so that you can help build the case, right? It's something totally different if you're in a little hot room in a refugee camp and you're just asking them, tell me your story, and asking them, what do you think should happen to make Liberia a better place? So I guess my one piece of advice would be, think about as you're doing the important work of interviewing your client and extracting the information that you need and putting that client in an uncomfortable position to have to talk about the really difficult things, build in the time to ask some questions about their opinion, what they think. And it can be just about tell me about soccer in your country, or whatever you're picking up in the interview about what's their interest. So ultimately that means seeing them as a whole person. And even with limited time, I think it can be really helpful in building that relationship of trust if you just ask them their opinion, ask them what they think.
If I can build on that, I've also heard from clients how important it feels for them when their attorney acknowledge that they know about the context of the country when they're creating the case. So I have clients that now do advocacy with me, remembering opportunities that have talked with their attorneys, and they were like, yeah, I was talking just about that with my attorney when I was building the case, and judiciary works like this or that in my country, or DA actually don't have that power in my country. Acknowledging the knowledge that they have about the country conditions and how the systems and institutions work in their country is very important for them. And you can feel how important it is for them to feel that they are included in the analysis of the context that is also part of their asylum case. And it's a way to also acknowledge that they had a lot of experience and they know more about the country that most of us know because they live in that country and they actually shape those institutions and in many cases help to mobilize those changes in the country and have been resilient to those abuses.
On that note, I'm going to jump in super quick because we have a couple folks on the webinar here with their hands raised. Hopefully I've done this right and given you all the ability to unmute yourselves and ask your questions. John, do you want to go ahead and go first, and then we'll go to you, Amy?
Everybody's looking up at the sky.
Cloud.
Otherwise, you can send your questions in the Q&A if it's easier.
They may have also been hands raised when Linus was asking people, have you lost a case? I know there were hands up there, so that may be it.
If, while we're waiting, I can just, oh, there's a question there, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, so this question is directed to Linus. So you said earlier the quote about losing. I forget exactly what it was, but you said that we would have to have a different metric to measure whether we're a good lawyer, because it can't be winning or like how many cases we win. But you didn't really elaborate on perhaps how you measure how you're a good lawyer. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about that, especially as, I'm thinking about these ideas and, I haven't lost because I'm just starting, but I don't know how I will, like, you know how you said that we're not supposed to center ourselves. That totally resonated with me, but still, I want to know, like, how you measure what a good lawyer is.
That's, yeah, I didn't give very specific metrics because I'm figuring that out myself, right? And I've been doing this for a little longer. I want to say that a lot of it some of it has really struck me because when I've had cases in which I've lost, I've been surprised by how often my clients who've lost and who are now facing and are in fact in the country that they did not want to go to and separated from their family and perhaps facing persecution, have nonetheless thanked me and said, well, thank you for all that you've done. I really appreciated it, right? And I can't say that like at the time when they say that I feel great, right? I don't. And I've also had the situation where I've won cases and my clients really kind of look at me like, well, duh, of course you should have won this case. And so it has led me to think, and the thing I think I have to think about really is like, I'll try to elaborate a little bit, but I have to think about like, what is the role of an attorney in that situation? Right? Like, if our role is to work in collaboration with that person, one of the measures is to make sure that the person feels like they understood and that they're empowered and that they can be involved at the process, right? And that's not an easy thing to measure, but it's certainly something that you can reflect upon and see. And then the other aspect of it really is to be really honest with ourselves and say, did I, were the processes that I had tried to do and put in place, did I do whatever I could at the time? And I want to be careful here because one of the things that I've heard quite a bit from some people is that they will put themselves to an impossible standard. Some of the things that you will hear from lawyers is like, did I do everything possible I could have done to win? And I want to be cautious because I don't think that's realistic, right? I think it's more realistic to say, did you do what you could in the situation that you were in? And did you sincerely and honestly, work hard and do that? And I want to be clear because we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make decisions that are not going to go our way. And then we have to kind of reflect upon that. So I'm sorry I don't have exact metrics. It's one thing that I'm actually really interested in talking to clients and former other people in the community and really, because I don't know if you were here on last night, but I think there was a sense, right, that people were like, lawyers, you think you're providing us all this stuff, but we're not getting what we need. And I think I really want to be cognizant of that and trying to figure out what is a way for us to be better at it, and whether that's, asking for direct feedback or speaking to clients in another way, because it's really difficult to do so without concerns about power dynamics and whatnot. But it is a good question, and the only thing I will say, I'll reflect back to you, hopefully in a few years, as you've been doing this for a while, to think, like, how is it that you think of in terms of trying to figure out whether you've done a good job on a case or not, even if it doesn't mean that your client has won the case?
Hi, I'm Diana, and I have a question going back to the discussion about legal empowerment and sort of the dynamic between organizations like the advocates and how I think sort of in this context we can sort of place them as like mediators or connectors between client activists and these institutional bodies. So I think my question would be, well, I think that it's sort of very concerning how a lot of these client activists, their story and their voice isn't really given like credibility or notice up until the point that they like do connect to organizations like the advocates. And that's when finally they have access to these institutional bodies. That's when their voices are finally starting to get heard. So what actions do you think we can take to sort of close that gap to the point where they don't have to go to like such extremes or take so many different routes to get their voices to be heard by these different types of like institutional bodies or just like groups in general?
You want to do it first? Want to take it? Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because just given where we're sitting as an international organization, like our international justice program is doing this work anyway, right? And so we're just incorporating our clients' voices into that. But it's a big gap, you know. So there should be, you know, client voices involved in the U.S., you know, immigrations, like commenting on the U.S. immigration system, and that's something our organization is also trying to engage with. So and then, you know, there's also the question of what is the role of you know, a lawyer in terms of connecting with other needs, whether it's basic needs or with groups that are doing advocacy. So I don't know that I have a great a great example, but that could be one area where you're, you know, seeing the client as the whole person and having conversations with them about what are you interested in, how would you like to get involved in the U.S. And then maybe making some suggestions for ways to get involved. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I might add in that's why every process should have a way to have participation from those who are affected too. And legal empowerment is that's what it's looking for, that those who are affected by the law are and shape the law and shape the institutions. So in larger view about systemic changes, every of these processes should have a space for participation and feedback and consent for those who are affected too. And like though that kind of processes builds from small actions like doing work, like the work that we are trying to achieve in our organizations, and like what Jennifer was saying, like having a relationship with your client that feels you are accountable to, and you are actually not making the decisions by yourself, but listening, actively listening what are their positions regarding their case, and opening the space, like with like being humble to say I'm accountable to you too about what I'm doing and how we are working together. What do you think about this? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you know your rights on this? Like there's something that I'm saying that doesn't make sense for you, and that's what we are trying to do a large scale in this process of doing international justice. But I've seen that in other organizing spaces. Ask them like, do you have any question? There is something that you want to add, and I think we can, if we are humble enough to open those spaces, then that will help to get more inclusion of those voices.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end it, but I just have to just highlight one thing, which is to just keep in mind that in the United States and in other diaspora communities, that there are people from different, they might represent different things, so do be careful about just saying, go to the Oromo group or go to, go to the Ethiopian group, because, there's conflict. We see a lot of conflict, and increasingly we're seeing, people in the diaspora reporting on other people in the diaspora. So that's, your client will know better than you on that, so.
And I'd also just put a plug in for the Advocates does have a paving pathways toolkit on their website too that's really designed for people to figure out where they fit into civil society and how they can engage as a person, as a group of people in a lot of those systems. So it's a really great resource if you're just looking for something to self-start. So.
Yep, that's on our publications page, Paving Pathways to Justice and Accountability.
Yeah, great. Okay, you're going to close us out, yes?
Yes.
All right.
Teresa was going to say something.
Can I jump in quickly and share what I think is a fantastic comment that we got on the Zoom? So I go back to Linus's conversation about losing before we go into wrapping up, which is from this person who states, "I'm 78, so I have thought about losing. It is one thing to lose because your preparation has been deficient. It is another to lose because you have pushed the boundary." So just want to throw that out there for everyone.
I'll do it while you're getting ready to close us out. I just want to make a note that please join us up in the Commons upstairs for a reception afterward. We've got the code for the fabulous prize that Hannah's going to announce on Monday to do the evaluation. We got a bowl out there for your name tags. Please return so we can reuse them. And just thank you, panelists and everyone, for joining us. Maybe I'll give them a round of applause before you close us out with a poem. All right.
The show isn't over until the fat lady sings, and since the previous poem was prefaced by "allow me to sing," or "I'm not a singer, but please let me sing," I shall sing. This is a poem by my own pen. It's untitled, but I felt that it was relevant, and I think it's a metaphoric expression of many of the cornerstones and topics and themes we've covered today. So I'd like to wrap up with this. Thank you for indulging me. I've been here before, a shuffling waiting room, queue, slowly moving towards that window, hopefully not a pit stop, but a finish line. My garment heavy with the dust and clouds, mud-caked like cinnamon, patiently gritting teeth behind softly pursed lips, scarf like a turban, a longing only known to a few, wrapped tightly around hair now locked, the teller of fortunes in earshot, undiscernible, stamping the papers of the younging who carved his own way, separate from his elder, breathing deserts and forests of rain, all types of terrain on his shoulders. He is eager to shed the skin of his forefathers, the coat of the nomad. Thank you very much.